This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 171.
I learned so much in that classroom, coming from countries where the food is different, where the weather is different. And it's a complete culture shock coming into a school system that's totally different. So helping parents and students be able to navigate that system is a huge.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Herman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Christopher, the Ethernet wire running man, Albrecht. I still will always remember that story the first time you were on the podcast talking about, what year was it? Early
1995.
95, building the internet.
Very hot in West Virginia that year. I can tell you that the fall of 95, West Virginia, the temperatures were in the 90s in September and October.
Well, the temperatures were up for our conversation tonight in a very positive way. We had a fantastic guest, the Vermont 2024 Teacher of the Year, and a lot of passion, a lot of pedagogy, a lot of great things in the conversation tonight.
Yeah, Aziza Malik, she extraordinary, kind of a visionary person, very creative person, and it seems that she's taking this idea of looking at your community and making it seamless with the classroom and with her students. And she really highlights throughout this whole podcast the importance of that the cohesiveness between community and school. And we're going to hear a lot of great ideas from her.
Definitely. And a lot of different ideas, talking about, like you said, the community piece, but, we circled back to some of the challenges that teachers are facing today. And I think we asked her some pretty tough questions, and she gave us some very honest, real answers. And I appreciated that from her, just as a professional, but also, now as a Teacher of the Year, she has that different pedestal to speak from. And she was open and honest about what's working, what's not working, where she's seeing challenges herself as a teacher. And it speaks to all of the different Teachers of the Year, you being included, that we've had on this podcast, where you can tell that they're great teachers and they have so much to offer, but at the same time they're facing the same challenges, and they're in the same classrooms that we are on a daily basis. So I think our listeners are going to get a lot of value out of this conversation.
Yep, I agree with you.
All right, so let's check in with Teach Better Network and then jump right into our conversation with Aziza Malik.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcast. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Aziza. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you could officially introduce yourself, let us know where you are coming from, and give us a snapshot of what your career in education has looked like.
Yeah. So my name is Aziza Malik. I'm the 2024 Vermont State Teacher of the Year. I am a fifth grade teacher in Burlington, Vermont, where I've been for the past 14 years. I have been in Vermont now, I guess, got to do some calculations here, for 23 years now. So I had a long history in environmental and farm-based education before I went into the public school system. But I'm very happily in the classroom now, and it's a place that I hope to stay for the rest of my career.
Very nice. Before we started recording, I joked that I was going to be the third wheel for the conversation, but Chris, I know you're a long time fourth grade teacher, and fifth grade was my bread and butter for a long time. So we might be reversing roles there a little bit, but I'd love to learn more about your environmental based education that you referenced, and really, give us an idea of what that looked like, but also what is one thing or a couple core values that you feel you established in that experience that has carried over to the classroom that you probably wouldn't have in your classroom if you had just jumped right into regular education?
Yeah, so I kind of have a long story around how I got back into the classroom, which I did originally go to school, to college to become a teacher. I even wanted to be a teacher at a very young age. Went to school for it and completed my 4-year degree. I'm from California originally. So in California, you do a 5th-year licensure program. And in between getting my 4-year degree and going back for that licensure program, I had graduated. I broke up with my boyfriend and was like, just get me out of here for a little bit. So my best friend from college was starting her grad school in New York City, at Columbia University. And I was just feeling very impulsive and said, I'll drive you cross country. So I drove with her cross country. And then along the way, when I was there, I have family along the East Coast. So I went up and down the East Coast, visited some family in Virginia, spent some time in New York City, and then in Burlington, Vermont is where I landed, where my 2 cousins were. And I thought I'd stay maybe just for, the summer, crash on their couch for a little bit. Then I said, well, I've never seen fall. Maybe I'll, check out fall. And I was like, well, maybe I should see winter. I had never seen snow fall from the sky before I moved here. And then now that's turned into 23 years later, I am still here. So one of the things that just really drew me in is the people here. I mean, Burlington, Vermont, or Vermont in general, just have the most incredible people who are passionate about what they do. And you can't just help but want to be around them all the time. So anyway, this is going to be a long rambling story, but anyway, I didn't have my license. So I started out working in the community. So I worked at the local food co-op to start off. Then I worked at a coffee shop that was also a place to see music at night. So they had live music every single night of the week. And so I got really immersed in the community here and just met, like I said, the most incredible people. But then after about a year, I was like, I really would like to get back to working with kids. That really is my passion. So I found a place called Shelburne Farms, which is right close to Burlington. It's, I think it's 1,600 acres. I got to remember my statistics now, but it's a working farm that was once owned by a pretty wealthy family. They're related to the Vanderbilts, but they've turned into an environmental and farm-based education center. And that really kind of set me off on a career path that really related to what I now call place-based education. So I lived and worked there for a year and a half, and I learned all about how to work with kids, the community, and be able to get yourself immersed in the place that you live, thinking about nature, food, lots of different things. And they're an amazing educational organization that does the most incredible professional development. If you ever get a chance to get to work with them, I always highly, highly recommend it. So that's where I kind of got my base and start with working with kids. Once again, after that, I worked in the city of Burlington has a network of organic farms right within the city called the Intervale. And so I ended up getting a job there as an AmeriCorps next. And I worked there from an AmeriCorps, it turned into a job where I did the same type of thing, farm-based education. But then now I was working with public schools and bringing them down to the farms to learn about how these organic farms were feeding our community. I still was working a ton with Shelburne Farms at that point. And then this position, the one thing that always was a little hard for me, as much as I loved the work, I really wanted more time with kids. Working in a nonprofit, you really have to do a lot of work raising money, grant writing. You're spending maybe one day with kids, or sometimes just an hour even, or maybe even less sometimes. So you have to build your relationships super quick. You don't get a chance to do the really deep dive work that I really wanted. And I worked enough with the schools that I saw that they were doing some really incredible things right in Burlington. They had just decided to switch 2 of their schools into magnet schools. One is a sustainability magnet school. The other one's an integrated arts school. So I was like, I think that sustainability school, I think I would really like to go there. So I ended up going through something called peer review. I didn't want to go back to school because Vermont, when I moved here, I found out was the absolute worst for higher education funding. It was going to cost me thousands and thousands of dollars to get my license. So I ended up doing this alternative route to licensure. So I got a placement at the Sustainability Academy for my student teaching, where I did a student placement internship I was there for about 6 months. So it was longer than a typical placement. And that kind of set me off. And then I got my job shortly after that at Champlain Elementary, which is in the South End, same Burlington School District where I really wanted to be. And that's just where I love. I've been there for the last 14 years, and I hope to retire there someday.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated with the idea of the building of your community. You're looking at your community, and you're talking about farming up there in Vermont, and it goes back historically, obviously. Question for you. I've done some reading about the Burlington area, and on Fridays, oftentimes kids don't go to a traditional classroom. They'll go to a farm or school to farm. Is that true?
Some places do, and some kids have the option to go to some other places,
Okay.
but not everyone.
Not everyone's doing that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I was curious about that because I did
Yeah.
a bit of
So
reading on that.
Yeah, that is one thing that I've really been trying to work to. There is currently the option that parents can elect to take their students out of school for 1 day a week to work, to be in like a private program, which I really don't believe in, because it really is about people who have transportation, who have access, who have the funding to pay for these programs. And I think all children should have access to that. So I kind of skipped over the question that asked me before, but about how it informs my work, which what I really do a lot of is bringing community into our school and trying to increase that access for all students, because I believe all students should have access to nature-based learning, to farm-based learning, to know the place that they live. So we both invite the community in, and we go out into the community quite a bit. Yeah. And so a few of our programs that we've done are specifically were spurred by the fact that people were allowed to do these programs. So our hope is that we do so much of it at school that you don't want to miss a day of school to go do that other program. We have it for you right there at school, and everyone has access to it. So we currently work with the Burlington Parks and Recreation Department program. So we've started a program in the last few years where we're thinking about how to further the goals of the cities, which are their climate goals. So they're trying to increase tree coverage and work on these nature-based solutions to climate change. So they're coming into our school. We're using it as a grounds for growing trees. We put in a wildlife corridor, a native tree nursery. We have something called the stick garden, which are cuttings of trees that we're also growing. And then we use those in restoration projects around the city. So they're teaching us lessons, all these conservation lessons. They're helping us manage the equipment. They have stuff to water, to, take care of all this stuff, but we are learning and kind of have the manpower to be able to help them in their goals as well. And then spreading that knowledge to everybody, which is helping their goals as well.
So is this program, from what I want to make sure I'm understanding you correct?
Mm-hmm.
This is something that's happening kind of school-wide, district-wide, that's being endorsed. It's not something that you're doing individually in your classroom.
So it started, honestly, with a conversation between me and a parent about how we didn't like this the private program. Mm-hmm. So she then connected us. Often city government and schools were working in isolation from each other, even though we're both city employees. We're not sharing resources. We're not working together. And she worked to connect the two of us together. Like, hey, you have these goals. You have these goals. Let's come together. So our pilot was just for Champlain Elementary, which is where I work. We're one of 6 elementary schools in the district. And so I think we're maybe in year 4 or so of that project. So each year we're taking on more and more. So we're just on our own for probably the first 2 years. And then now we have expanded into a few other schools as well. And it's different because some of them are like right in the middle of the city with almost 0 places to grow things. We also have ones with much more property than us. So it's been really interesting to see how each site can be used in different ways. And so that's kind of the phase that we're at right now, where we've expanded into several more schools with the hope that the whole district will be part of this. And hopefully it's used as a model as well elsewhere. The program presented at like the UN Climate Summit that happened in Poland. And it's just a really cool model that thinking about how can we take something that we both want, mutual goals for both. It's not like one's giving and the other one's just taking. It's really how can we help each other to work on these goals.
So talk us kind of through that process and recommendations you would have with other teachers that maybe have a passion or something that they see as a need or an opportunity in their own community, in terms of how do you make those first connections? How do you make those first
Mhm.
phone calls? How do you develop the model in your own classroom to then expand it to be something that is going district wide? What are some strategies teachers can use to fuel their passions to really, because what you just described is a perfect example of a grassroots effort that
Mhm.
has reached the point of no longer needing to be grassroots. So what's kind of the process for teachers to take those steps in passion projects like
Yeah, so I think number one, have a passion. So, what's
that?
something that brings you joy, brings you passion? Because I think oftentimes a lot of people shy away from things because they think, oh, that's so much work, because we already have so much work. We have so much on us. But then, if you have that spark, if you have that thing that is fueling you, it's not going to feel like work because then you also start to get connected. So, number one, have the passion. Number two, find other people that also have that passion. So, the project I was just telling you about, it was literally a conversation with a parent in my classroom. We just were having a chat about nature-based programs and passions. She also works in nature-based education. And we just were both very passionate about wanting to have all students have access to this. So she started throwing out ideas. I started throwing out ideas. And she actually, I think, said this to me. There's such power in a pilot. So really just give it a try, have a few willing and able participants. So all the projects that I've ever done have never been required by anyone. I never say you have to do this. It's always opt-in. And I think that's really essential because teachers do have so much on their plates that I want to make it an access point for everyone. That what can we do to meet you so that you are doing these things that I am passionate about? I want to see you getting outside with kids. I want to see them connecting to their community. I want to see them making change in their community. If you don't have the tools to be able to do this, what can we do to help you get there? So, our first step was we had someone come in who would organize all the lessons. So, we had some AmeriCorps people that were helping this program before we got in with Parks and Recreation that were organizing the lessons for us. So, all teachers had to do was sign up for a time and come outside, and then they could interact with some of the lessons. The next step now is we've actually hired someone who's now employed by the Burlington Parks and Recreation District. And we just take those building blocks one at a time. So now we're able to expand into those other schools because we do have that staff member who has the capacity. But I
Mhm.
think starting small. So, what's your passion? Find other people to connect to. Try a pilot, try it out, see what works, what doesn't. Meet people where they are, and then build that capacity as you go.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and Christopher, I'd love for you to chime in. I'm sure over the years you've been involved in some capacity like this, one way or another. Even if it's going all the way back to when you were running the Ethernet wires for the original tech classroom you built down in West Virginia. But
Yeah, little
um,
different than growing
I,
things
I
and
I
growing
was
things in the
involved in
garden.
something similar. I was very
Mhm.
passionate about elementary STEM, and
Mm,
when I was teaching fifth grade, we were a 5 day rotation. We had four specials, and then we had computer lab that was run by ourselves as homeroom teachers. And my students were using computers in the classroom, so I slowly through grants started obtaining some robotics, some 3D printers, and converted my computer lab time to a STEM lab time. And like you said, the thing that hit with me is I was passionate about it. So it was a lot of work, but it never felt like work, and I just focused on student outcomes. And one of those student outcomes just being the smile on their face, right? And getting the students to share and showcase, and inviting administrators in to see that, and and then working with my colleagues and my two counterparts wanted to do the same, but they weren't comfortable with it. So I started teaching their computer lab too, to give them the STEM lab experience. And now we have an elementary STEM as a special. We have teachers that are hired for those positions. And so you really can build those things purely out of passion. But I think it's important to align it to something that's going to make a difference for students that they're going to be excited about as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions for you. I'm thinking about my own classroom right now. We've got it's a 100-gallon trout tank. We have about 200 trout growing in my room. My partner teacher complains all the time that my room smells a little bit, but one of the reasons I have that trout tank is there has to be a buy-in of passion for myself, but really the whole purpose of what I'm putting in my classroom is really driven by my students. So I guess, Aziza, my question to you is, as you're looking at these programs, how much you're working with fifth graders right now, and those fifth graders are at an age where they can take charge. They're not little kids right now. They're capable of leading. How much leadership is taken over by them as you work through the year? How does the year start out? How do you empower those kids to take in those leadership roles? And then as the year goes on, what is their role in the whole process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so fifth grade is all about leadership.
Mm-hmm.
All the way. It's their final year at our school of elementary school. So they take on so much leadership, and I believe so much in having the curriculum and the projects that we do really be driven by them and really about the community need, like what I was talking about. We want what we're doing to not just be something that we're learning about in a book, but we're actually making a difference in our community, and they can do it today. They don't have to wait until they're 18 and graduated. Well, how can they use those skills that they're learning in school, and how can they learn as they're actually making a difference in their community? That's a huge part of what we try to talk about throughout the year. Like, this is actually for real. We're actually working on climate goals of the city, or we're actually, another big project that I do is working to make our cafeteria foods more reflective and our gardens more reflective of our diverse community in Burlington. We're a refugee resettlement city. So this is just a small example, but we just recently revamped one of the recipes. It's a curry recipe, so we researched it. They taste tested it. They trialed it with their peers in the cafeteria, and now that item is now on the cafeteria menu. So it's really driven as much as possible by needs of the community and interests of the students, and giving them a place to be able to practice those things that we want them to learn how to do. So they're reading, they're writing, they're using math, they're learning how to advertise as they have their taste tests, and use descriptive language or whatever we can do to get those skills in a way that they would actually appear in real life. We recently also we're working with a local radio station to create public service announcements. So we were trying to work on some speaking and listening skills, and but also thinking about how can we help our community by creating these messages. Like, who are they going to? Why are we writing these things if they're not to create some good in the community? So as much as possible, we try to have them have that leadership role and actually use their work to create a difference. Within our school, like I said, we're fifth grade, so we're paired. I like to do a lot of pairing with younger grades. So I'm buddies with 2 other classrooms. So we work with a preschool class, and we also work with a second grade class. Again, working on whatever the needs are for them. We also try to connect upwards. So we have students in the high school that come back, and my favorite part now that I've been there for a long time is having my former students come back, and then they're like, oh, here's like the stream that we planted these trees on, and now look how big they are. And they're remembering how they worked on these projects from way back then as well. We get lots of visitors that are coming to our school that want to know about the types of things that we're doing. And I hate public speaking. I really do. I try to avoid it at all costs. So the students are always presenting. So they presented to the mayor, they've presented to the head of every department of our city. Like, they all came for a tour before. They've presented to the school board. So they really are getting practice in front of some like real audiences, and people are coming to us. The newest mayor of Burlington has reached out to us, and she came in. We invited her in for a unit we were doing about government. Students shared what they were thinking about what's going on in our city, and now we're working together with her. She invited us to her swearing in ceremony, gave us a huge shout out, and now we have some active projects with her about addressing vandalism and litter in our community with her. So working on a series of cleanup days around the city, because that's an issue that they saw as a problem. And she really came to us to ask us about what we want to do about it. So again, as much as we can have it come from the kids, that's who's going to really be making that difference.
So I love how you both referenced about the leadership aspect, and I completely agree. Fifth grade was the last year in elementary school for us as well, and there was so much focus we put on developing that. Over time, as you do projects like this more and more, you'll have classes. My classes were typically 30 kids, where you have students that just run with it, students that you're able to really develop leadership qualities into, and then other students that just never step up to the plate. And then class to class, years where it's everything, it's just everybody's firing on all cylinders. And then you have other classes where that leadership, that strong leadership cohort is non-existent or very small. So how do you manage your expectations for the kids, and just still empowering them and allowing them to thrive and pushing their boundaries, but also accepting that every kid is different, and class to class, year to year is going to look and feel a little bit different?
Yeah, I guess I try to build in a lot of ways, like I was saying before with teachers, not everyone's going to feel comfortable with everything. So how do you meet them where they're at? So is it that they need some sentence frames? They need some help with a script? Do they need to pre-record something? Do they need some one-on-one session time? Do they need a partner? Are they the artist that's holding something up and the other person is speaking, or vice versa? And then, like you said before, pushing those boundaries too, like saying, this is the expectation. You have something to say and it is important. And we really try to develop that every single day in the classroom. So we start every morning with a morning meeting. You probably do this in your classes too. So we say hello to every single person in the classroom. We let them know we're glad they're here and they have something to say. We do a share where every single person shares. We just make sure to really have those systems in place. Sometimes we're picking sticks, so you might be called on, but we always give the turn and talk time ahead of time. So you feel prepared enough to be able to speak. We're giving you the supports that you need, but we do want to hear what you have to say. And we try to create that environment where you feel comfortable enough to do it. And yes, some people may go on to take that leadership all the way, into their careers and lives. And some, they're going to feel proud and they're going to remember that time that they spoke in front of the mayor, or they spoke, to their peers, whoever it is. They're going to remember those times because it's important when you are in front of a group and everybody's listening to you. So I push everyone. Everyone has a part in everything that we do, even if it's a small part, even if it's a one sentence. Every single kid is going to present and say at least one thing when we're having those big leadership opportunities.
Yeah, you're touching on something, and I'll go back to just that explicit fish tank example that I gave. We've got two boys that clean the tank on Monday, and that they love that because they're looking at the fish and observing them more. We've got two very technical girls on Tuesday that eat up at lunch, and they're resource people, and they're reaching out and they present to the class. So that just the four of them have really taken over the tank. Do you feel that like every project, every kid in the classroom needs to be part of, or do you split it up a little bit by what they're interested in, or do you have multiple things going on at the same time? And then also one of the things that I'm curious on, if you are splitting it up, how are they giving feedback to the class? Are they presenting it, or how does that all look explicitly?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the project is. So things like if we have, the department city heads coming in to learn about our native tree nursery, every single student is going to have some part in that presentation. Within the classroom, I try to give a lot of choice as to what you're doing. So if we're doing a unit about the Civil War right now. So we have a choice board of different ways that you can present your learning. So that's, to me, like more where I get a lot of differentiation, but in like a public presentation style type thing, it's definitely every single kid has a role of some sort, whether it's music, whether it's some decorations, but every student will have their voice heard at least a little bit during there. And then all of our projects are so different. So one thing that is not everyone loves when they're on my team is that I really don't always do the same thing every single year because I really try to guide it by what community needs are, what student interests are. And sometimes there's different roles for things. So one year we decided to create a record at our school, so like a music record. So it was, I forget when this was, maybe about 5 years ago, maybe longer than that, 8 years ago. A record plant started just a couple blocks down from us. So it's like one of the only record plants in the country, and it happened to be a friend of mine that I knew from the coffee shop band days. And we decided, like, what if we created our own record that we could put out to the community? So we worked with our music teacher. We decided on the songs. So that was kind of a collaboration of everyone thinking about the songs, but kids had to research things like copyright. What could we record? What couldn't we record? How do you go about obtaining that and obtaining permissions to be able to sing different things? And so we definitely had research teams on that type of thing. Some people really were trying to figure out the recording. Some people were on the marketing team. So they were organizing our record release party, which was at there was like a music club also on our street. So we recorded, pressed the record, and released it all on the same street. That was like our tagline. So the marketing team came up with that part. And there was an art team as well that kind of did the graphic design. We made woodcut prints of what we stamped on the record cover, I guess it's called, the sleeve. And so people had more of a choice there of, do you want to do the more artsy stuff? Do you want to be part of the marketing team? Do you want to be the fundraising team, thinking about the money? So it really, truly depends on the project. And if there's opportunity to kind of specialize, we try to really let kids specialize if the opportunity arises, but it doesn't always arise in every single project.
So with all of these projects and ideas you've been talking about, I think you forgot to mention what page in the manual that this can be found on, and what lesson number this correlates to. So as a fifth grade teacher, you are state, I would assume even in Vermont, you are liable for state testing. All of our teachers are turning in their percentages on their students right now, so they can have their scores properly correlated to their professional outcomes. So reflecting on my days, I very often got the questions, how do you fit this in and still teach all of the lessons that you're supposed to? So I would love for you to weigh in on this conversation about how you navigate all of that professionally.
Yeah, so I think, especially in my earlier days, we had a little bit more freedom because we didn't have a prescribed literacy curriculum. So that is such an opportunity right there. All the reading, writing, listening, speaking. I mean, there's just a million ways to go on there, any topic, so you can add that in there so easily. In the last 2 years, we've just gotten a new literacy program, and I'm not going to lie, it definitely has been a challenge to find the time because we are being held so much more now we now have a computer program where I have to enter points on different reading things, and it's a challenge. And, I'm trying to find ways to be able to find those units and, find ways to connect to our community that aren't like, we're doing an ecosystem unit. So we're learning about things like the Arctic, which great to learn about, but I was like, oh, okay, like I want to learn about here too. So adding things in where I can. We have a lot of freedom in our social studies and science time. So I squeeze it in there where I can, but in the recent years, I would say it's becoming increasingly more difficult as expectations around data entry. Like, we never had this computer program before where we have to type in notes about different things. And I was reflecting, actually, somebody asked me this question recently, and I was thinking back to COVID, and that actually was as hard as COVID was, it actually was a really awesome time in education because we had so much space to do what was needed for our students. So we had no state testing. We really had some freedom to really be able to meet kids where they were at. We had Wednesdays all day at our district just for planning. Like we didn't have any students that day, so we could actually have collaborative time with our teams that felt like enough time to have meetings, time to talk about our passions and how we could work together. And then just a couple years later, they were like, oh, just kidding. Never mind. Everything's back to normal. And now we have this computer program. And now we have to really have these new regulations that we have to track data and you have to turn this in. And if you don't turn it in, we're going to be all over you. So it just was like a huge shock to the system to go from this kind of space and slow and really doing what we needed to. Those felt like my best projects and my best years of teaching because I had that. It felt like such a gift to have that time. And I hope that we can learn from this because we are losing teachers left and right. My teaching teammate of 10 years just left this year. It's been a really tough year for me not having her there because she's my teaching soulmate and she's not there by my side. And I love my new teaching teammate as well, but it's just like people who are amazing, brilliant educators are leaving because people are breathing down our necks. And we know what's right for kids. We know we need to re-envision schools, right? Like this, like policing data, like what is it really telling us? I can skew that data so easily. I can be like, yep, click, 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 click. Here's some points for you. But is that really meaningful? To me, it's not. The meaningful stuff is when we're creating change in our communities and we're instilling those values in our students that we want to make the place we live a better place. Like, let's focus on that. And I understand regulations, rules, we have to be doing, held to certain standards. But I hope that we can learn from those times and know that teachers do know what they're doing and just give them that belief and that trust to do what's right for their students.
You made mention that Burlington is a refugee hub. I think we're seeing, I think that was a term we used a lot, probably 5-6 years ago, and it was more exclusive to a Burlington or exclusive to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, exclusive to certain areas of the country. But I think as we head into 2024-25 area, I think it's becoming more of almost every city is a refugee hub of some sorts. That as we all are kind of facing people coming in, our area, we have a lot of people coming in from the Ukraine right now. And we're hitting that, that those people that have language barriers, and all sorts of cultural barriers. They're shy. They don't know how to communicate. They have just different ways they conduct their day. How are you looking at, and this is a complete shift of gear. Maybe it's not actually, because we're talking a little bit about data right now and regulations, but how are you bridging that gap in a place like Burlington where you're getting a lot of people from, and I'd be curious, like what countries are coming into Burlington area too?
Yeah. So when I was telling my long story of getting into education, after I did my student teaching, I did another additional year of AmeriCorps service at the Integrated Arts Academy, which is another magnet school in Burlington. And I worked in a very special program of theirs, which was specifically for new arrivals. So people who had just come to this country who did not speak one single word of English. And it was a 1st through 5th grade classroom, so multi-age, intensive language learning. I learned so much in that classroom, coming from countries where the food is different, where the weather is different. And it's a complete culture shock coming into a school system that's totally different. So helping parents and students be able to navigate that system is a huge undertaking, huge. And it's something that I am very, very passionate about. My dad is from India. He was an immigrant here who did not speak a whole lot of English when he first came to this country as well. And Burlington is a hub of diversity for a very extremely white state. So coming here to Vermont also was a little bit of a culture shock for me as well, because that's not where I grew up. I grew up in Southern California. It was very different. So I've always wanted to be in somewhere that has that diversity. And so that was really something that drew me to Burlington in particular. My school has 17 languages in it currently. So we're extremely language diverse, culturally diverse. So I think I would just go back to what I was saying before, that we need to meet students and families where they're at. And things like data don't always show growth and where someone comes from. Like, how do you measure someone who had just moved and maybe possibly from a really terrible situation that is now in a new country? And, like, does their reading score really tell the whole story? Does their math score really tell that? No, we really need to just be thinking more holistically about that. We're really lucky here in Burlington to have a lot of services that help, like the program I was telling you about. We also have what's called liaisons that we have. So multilingual liaisons, people who speak multiple languages and are culturally knowledgeable, that help bridge that gap between school and home for, our general population that's there. Lots of language services. But I also have been working a lot to make sure that our schools really do feel welcoming to people from all sorts of backgrounds. So I spoke a little bit earlier about the project that I had. We call it Celebrating Our Roots. So we have a farm program here in Burlington called New Farms for New Americans, where people from other countries grow crops from their homeland in the Intervale where I used to work. And it's like having a piece of home when you have that food that you're really familiar with. So we grow some of those crops. We're actually going on a field trip there just on Thursday. So we'll be down there visiting some of the farms that are down there, learning about the crops that they grow. We grow them also in our garden at school. And then we try to use those crops within our cafeteria. So food is a huge thing where you're coming, again, if you're from somewhere different and you're getting this school cafeteria food, which we have a great cafeteria program. We have excellent food, but it's not always the types of food that people are used to. And we used to always joke in the classroom I was telling you about that it would smell really bad because people's stomachs aren't used to the types of foods that we're serving even. So how do we start to bring some of those things in to make it feel welcoming for all? And then also to broaden the palates of other people too, right? So we want our students to not be like, ew, what's this weird food over here? We want them to really expand their palates as well. So it's a benefit for the people that are coming here because they feel that piece of home, but it's also a benefit to the greater, the larger population that we have here that's getting exposed to something that maybe they hadn't been before. I'm not
So
sure.
to
I
go
think I
back,
maybe lost track of your question there.
no, you went
Okay.
full, you actually went in the direct. I was answering it really well. So I guess now to bridge it back to what Ken was saying, when you're dealing with this diverse population and we're trying to make them feel welcome, and we are accountable to the school district that we're in, and I feel administrative pressure as well. I mean, I think almost every teacher nowadays feels that administrative pressure, that data driven pressure right there. As you face that, and this is probably the hardest question of the evening, how are you managing that? Some people say the old term, just kind of quietly close your door and do what's best by kids, which a lot of people use that.
Yeah.
What's your method right now that's you would recommend to people as you're now in a place of distinction now? What would be your recommendation to people as we're facing these different challenges, different language barriers, different socioeconomic barriers you mentioned right there? What's your suggestion then, besides just, I understand what you're saying, identity development and helping people understand themselves, but now you're facing pressure from administration. How do you balance the two?
So I think definitely using the resources that are available. If your district does not have those resources, so like I was talking about the homeschool liaisons, the EL teachers, how can you use your team to be able to manage and meet the needs of everyone? We've also been really lucky, I think, in the last few years to get the extra social workers and counselors in our schools too, because the classroom teacher, at least at elementary level, we take on so much. So we're counselors, we're social workers, we're all the things. But if you can lean on your community to be able to work together to meet those needs, especially when there's so many of them, that's the way to go. Like, you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to close your classroom door and just say, I'm going to do it all. How can you work with others to share that load to be able to do what's right by your community?
So I want to play devil's advocate a little bit. I think that it's important for us as educators to voice our concerns with administrators or with programs or whoever that audience may be. But at the same time, we also have to reflect and say, well, maybe this will work, or maybe this is better, or maybe there is something that I'm not aware of that I need to see here. And we can't just assume that, and I'm not saying you've said this, but we can't just assume that this new thing isn't going to be better or isn't going to give us reason to improve. So do you have any reflections on the data and the programs and the processes that you've kind of been forced to use? If you step back and reflect and say, if I'm giving some freedom, if I'm given the ability to do more of what I did in the past because I saw the value, what are some things that you have gleaned some light on that you were forced to do that you now say, you know what, even if they said, I don't have to do this anymore, I would continue to use this practice, or I would continue to use this program, or I would continue to enter this data or keep track of that, because you have seen the value in it, or maybe it's helped you pay attention to certain things that you weren't necessarily looking at before. Could you glean anything from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest shift that we've had is a new literacy program. So a lot of the science of reading stuff has been coming out. We've shifted away from our old programs and then gotten into a new one. And the number one thing that I love about this program, and I go fully in, I wanted to know everything about this program. I gave it definitely my all, even though I really hate entering those points on the computer. I would not take that part away that I love. The part that I do really absolutely love is that there is a clear sequence from kindergarten all the way through fifth grade. We are hitting every single standard. We know no matter which classroom you came from, or if you transferred from another school in our district, we know what you've learned about. We know the topic you've learned about. We know the sequence that it's gone in. And the way that it builds is really, really thoughtful. So before it was like some people were doing the hamburger paragraph, some people were doing the leaf paragraph, some people were doing this other thing. And it was very disjointed. Not that any of it was bad teaching, but there is such power in really being on the same page about that and having the same language consistently through the grades. And the program that we have really is more of a framework. So we do have some text, we do have, a system for being able to do it, but you have some flexibility. So we were able to talk to the books that came with some of the units were not great, but we were able to talk to our curriculum director and she got us a new book. And so now we have a book that we had an adventure unit, and the old one was really just not great. It didn't meet any of the needs of what they were actually trying to teach. But now we have a text that also is about climate change, which is obviously something that we teach about too, but it's an adventure story that incorporates climate change. So we were able to use it because it's a framework. It's not a prescribed, you need to be on this page on this day type of workbook. But I would say absolutely the best thing about it is that really thoughtful sequence that I think does good by kids. Like they really I've seen immense growth from that. Another thing that has been great about the program is each student has what we call a power goal. So that really individualizes it, and it does keep me on track. Like kids know what their goal that they're working on is, so it keeps them on track. It keeps me on track. Like, oh yeah, we were talking about sensory details, or we were talking about finding the main idea. How have you found that in your independent reading? So it kind of gives you a focus for what you're working on during your independent reading times, which I think is everyone needs goals. That's great. So that's been a really helpful thing as well. But the manual data entry, people kind of breathing down your neck if you haven't entered enough points, that's the part that doesn't feel great.
And I get that too. We just adopted all very similar language arts series, and at first I'm not it's fun. I started out my career in technology, and here I am sitting years later, and I kind of shy away from the computers now because of that data entry. But what I found is kids can type their essays now in, and I can speak to the computer on my own time and talk to it, and they can listen to my own voice, and that personalization right there. So I guess your message of being open-minded, I think it's a very good one right now, because there is some resistance immediately when we get new series. We always get that cringe feeling because we're in a comfort zone with what we're used to. So that is a very good message right there to send along with that. Technology in the classroom. Let's take a shift. You've been talking about the garden.
Yeah.
What's technology look like in Aziza's classroom?
Yeah. So we up until COVID had a shared Chromebook cart, and then when COVID came, we all got the one-to-one devices, which was amazing. So since then, I just feel like there's been an amazing shift to being so able to use them flexibly for a ton of things. My students love, love, love technology. We use the Google Suite of apps. So being able to put something on Google Classroom, have them type. I'm on my computer in real time, leaving them comments, showing them little edits. It's just so phenomenal to be able to do that. I mean, I think back to the handwritten every other line, doing your editing marks. I mean, being able to see all your versions of things. It's just a complete shift and incredible. So I use a lot of Google Classroom for many, many activities. You could take a quick survey. You can get feedback right away. Your writing really is the number one thing. I use a program called Seesaw to communicate with parents. So students take pictures, they write journal entries, and that goes immediately to their parents. So they're really getting a snapshot of what they're seeing in the classroom. So it's no longer inside the backpack, maybe never getting seen. It's going straight to their email. They're seeing like a picture or a video or an audio recording of their student and what they're doing in the classroom, which I think has just been an amazing communication tool for parents and teacher. They love WeVideo is another program we use. So they're creating videos. We can do it from everything from making a book trailer to creating advertisements, all sorts of different uses for that one. They are obsessed with making music on it. Our music teacher uses something called Soundtrap and Noteflight, so they're composing music. They've been currently composing music. We worked with someone who was doing something called soundscapes. So we went out in nature and recorded different nature sounds, and they've been creating pieces of music that incorporate these natural sounds into them. And then they're trying to raise awareness about the environment through these. It's based on somebody named Paul Winter, who does this type of music and composition. So they love that. They love Canva. Teachers get free Canva professional accounts, which is incredible. So creating book covers, graphic design. So we use a lot of different tools. I love the Chromebooks. They love the Chromebooks. So that's probably the main thing that we do. I mean, I also live by Google Slides, all my lessons. I've got what you're doing, the teaching points, everything's right there. And then you have them year after year. You can update them as you go. But it lets you know exactly what you need to be doing, where it needs to go, what the volume level should be, how much time you have for it, all in just one easy to read thing, versus having to write out each thing or hope that they remember what those multi-steps of tasks were.
Right.
So if you had to step back and for whatever reason not use technology, what would be the hardest? What do you think is the hardest part for you to give up? What would be the reason if for whatever reason we hit a wave in technology? And Chris, I'm sure you can speak to how everything is a pendulum in education. So let's say 10 years from now, the pendulum is swinging that students should not have devices in schools. What would be your stance on the Hill to say why we need technology in schools to benefit students?
Yeah, so I do think it's a balance. I definitely want them to have that outdoor time. I do want them to know how to write with their hands.
Right.
I do want them to read a paper book. So I think there does need to be balance within there. But actually, in our own district, they announced that they are not going to be renewing one-to-one devices for grades 3 through 5, which we would be the only school in our entire state, our only district that is not going to have one-to-one devices. So the day actually might come where we don't have these one-to-one devices, which I just don't know how we would go back with the writing in particular. So I would say, especially with the focus on literacy and what they're expecting for us to be able to write, our standardized testing as well, you're expected to type on demand within an hour a full essay that's responding to something that you read. If they have not had regular practice composing writing on a computer, there is no way they are going to meet that standard. And if we want them to write at the level that we're writing, they need to have access to these tools. And think about our jobs. How much do you use all these tools? Could you imagine not being able to write emails or compose things electronically and having to write by hand? I mean, it just is so inefficient. So we really need to be able to embrace the tools that are there and use them to our advantage so kids are prepared for when they are entering the workforce.
Yeah, I think technology gives such an advantage for, I'll say, and Chris, you kind of alluded to this with the audio feedback, the asynchronous feedback and targeted instruction of students. Because, like you said, you can leave those audio comments in their writing when it's a good time for you, and then they can listen to it and utilize it in class. And so now you have more time for conferences, or now instead of doing conferences, you can do a small group targeted instruction lesson on, how to write an effective introduction, because there's 6 kids that all got the same feedback on their introduction. So it just allows you to, I really feel it allows you to differentiate at a much more effective capacity and give you more time with students. I was big on flipped learning and utilizing screencasts for a long time. Started using it in 2015, and I had a teacher challenge me once in a collegial professional way to say, I don't want to make videos because I want to have relationships with my students. I want to spend more time with them. And I said, well, that's why I do it, because now they all can just watch this basic lesson on adding fractions. That's not good personal time with students. Now I can spend 15 minutes with students who really need a slow paced, very basic instruction on this skill, while others, they just need the basics and they can move on. And so I really feel like technology allows us to do that. So I could talk to you all night. I've really enjoyed this, but I want to shift into our exit ticket, which are the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. So question number 1, I'm going to hit you with, and then Chris will take the next 2. What is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
I think the number one thing would be to build that relationship. So to get to know them on a personal level, ask them questions, find out who they are, and really seek to connect with that.
Okay. What's the best advice you've ever received from a colleague or a supervisor or even a student that has influenced your career, influenced the way your outlook, your pedagogy, anything?
That's a tough one. I think the best advice that I wish I could have told myself right away was that just focus on the things that are really important. Nobody's going to care what that bulletin board that you spent hours and hours and hours making look perfect is. What's going to matter is the relationships, and lean on your students a lot because they love doing those things. You shouldn't be working harder than your students. So work together.
So work together. Okay, that is good advice. All right, so we know that the school year goes in waves. There are those days or weeks that we have to struggle to survive. You talked about you talked about your one colleague of 10 years too, and that struggle sometimes that teachers have. What's something that every educator needs to hear to power up in that moment of struggle?
Wow, these are hard ones. I would say that remember why you're there, and that you have 1 year with these students, and make the most of it. That it's going to make a world of difference, and just remember the impact that you're having in these moments, and then you get summer.
Can't forget about that. And based on when we're recording, it's coming very soon.
Yes.
So
some of us upstate New Yorkers have till the end of June. Not forget us.
Yeah, no comment. It's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. what separates the teachers who are the ones constantly seeking change, innovation, and adopting new teaching strategies?
I think a lot of it is mindset. I think it's openness to that change and being able to take risks, knowing that it doesn't need to be perfect, and that the risk is really worth the reward. And like we were talking about earlier, find that passion. When you're fueled by passion, you are willing to do those things and you will be rewarded for it.
That's nice. So how can your audience connect with you? So tonight we've got a chance to meet you. We got a glimpse into your teacher world. It seems like a wonderful world. How can people connect with you if they all of a sudden heard something tonight and really had a question or a thought and wanted to discuss it with you?
The best way would probably be through email. I am not a presence on social media at all or anything like that, but I'm always happy to talk to people. And I love to work with other people and I love to connect, especially if you have an idea for a project. Or if you want to come visit our school, I love showing people what we do at our school. Or I should say, my students love to show people what we do at our school because they're the ones who would be presenting to you, not me.
That's amazing. I would love when adults would come into the room and you just pass them right off to the students. And
Yes.
there's nothing better than an adult being impressed with what students can share about what they're learning, how they're learning it, and what they're doing. It really speaks volumes to what goes on in the classroom. So thank you again so much. This conversation has been fantastic. I feel like we hit a lot of different things and really dove deep on some of your passions, and your school district is clearly very, very lucky to have you in the classroom, and now your state as well as a representative of Teacher of the Year. So thank you again so much for your time. And Christopher, why don't you take us on out of here?
Well, and congratulations on your distinction as the 2024 Vermont Teacher of the Year. Enjoy the year. It goes by fast. So as we power down tonight, I feel very powered up for school and tomorrow's school day to come. Thank you very much for coming on today's show. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.